Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Align, Inform, Inspire, Measuring Business Agility in SAFe with Flow Metrics. Our presenters today are Scaled Agile Principal Consultant and SAFe Fellow, Andrew Sales, and Tasktop Sr Value Stream Architect, Reid. With that, I will pass over to Andrew to begin our webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura, and welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to talk today about SAFe metrics, and in particular how we've incorporated the flow framework into SAFe. But perhaps the best place to start when we're thinking about measuring is what is the goal we're trying to achieve. Now, with the release of SAFe version 5 came the goal of business agility. You can see that defined on the slide here. We talk about the ability to compete and thrive in the digital age by quickly responding to market changes and emerging opportunities with innovative business solutions. And what we know is that achieving business agility requires constant reflection. The markets which we're operating in are constantly evolving. Technologies are progressing all the time. And this means that SAFe enterprises need to make the right decisions at the right time to make sure they're on the right path. And to do this successfully, they need information. And that's where metrics come in. Metrics will inform them and help them to take these decisions appropriately. Now, we've always had guidance around metrics in SAFe. You can access it by clicking on the metrics icon from the big picture. But up until a few months ago, the metrics article was more a collection of things you may choose to measure rather than a measurement model. So what we've changed and introduced a couple of months ago is what you see on the slide here. A comprehensive, scalable, yet simple model to help you think about how you measure your progress towards the goal of business agility. And central to this model are three measurement domains: competency, flow, and outcomes. But perhaps before I explain what I mean by those domains, I'll tell you a little bit about how we arrived at this model itself. So as we were going through the progress of evolving this IP, we started by asking ourselves, what does it mean? What are the steps required to actually achieve business agility? How do we go from sensing an opportunity through to delivering that business solution that leverages that opportunity? And what you see on the slide here is what we're calling the business agility value stream, the key steps an enterprise needs to go through to effectively achieve business agility. Now, once we had that mapped out, the measurement domains became much clearer. We need to measure outcomes. Do the solutions that we're developing meet the needs of our business and our customers? We need to measure flow. How efficient are we at moving value through those steps? And we need to measure competency. How proficient is the organization in the lean agile practices that really enable business agility? And what we're going to do today is talk through each of these three measurement domains. I'll speak about outcomes and competency, and Lee, of course, is going to talk us through flow and the flow framework. Now, one other important thing about the model that I want to mention here is that we've designed it to be applicable at all levels of the organization. So you can apply these three measurement domains within an Agile team, across an art or solution train, or across an entire SAFe portfolio. So for example, you're going to see shortly that we might use iteration goals as a way of measuring outcomes that an Agile team is striving towards. The release train may use does use their PI objectives to help them focus on outcomes. And shortly you'll see that we define outcomes across a portfolio through a set of development value stream KPIs. So let's now dig into that first measurement domain, which is outcome metrics. And just remember, this is where we're measuring whether we're actually delivering on the needs of the business and our customers. And let's start at the portfolio level and think about how within SAFe we measure outcomes across a SAFe portfolio. It's worth just reminding us what we mean by a SAFe portfolio. So a SAFe portfolio governs a set of development value streams. And the development value streams contain all the people, all the activities required to develop the enterprise's solutions. And by solutions, we mean products, systems, or services, whatever the enterprise is building to deliver value to their customers. We're going to measure the success of these development value streams in meeting their outcomes by a set of development value stream KPIs, or key performance indicators. But really important to this model is that they're derived from two sources. The first source, which we'll look at in a minute, is determined by the type of work the development value stream does. The second source is going to be directly related to the strategic themes that this development value stream is realizing at this particular point in time. So let's have a look at those in turn. So the first one I mentioned, the nature of the work the development value stream does. One thing we need to remember is that development value streams build solutions that are used by the organization's operational value streams. So these operational value streams are either using these solutions as the operational systems they require to actually get their work done effectively, or they may be the solutions that the operational value streams use to actually sell to the customers. And of course, by an operational value stream, we simply mean the steps that an enterprise goes through to actually deliver this value to their customers. Now, what you can see from the table here is that most of the meaningful KPIs that we're going to measure ourselves against are those that are associated with the type of work that the operational value stream does. In other words, the operational value stream that is supported by the development activities we're doing. So for example, if we're developing systems to support a fulfillment operational value stream, maybe this is fulfilling a digital service or digital product like a loan. Here we're going to measure things like Net Promoter Score, customer lifetime value. Alternatively, if we're a development value stream developing a software product, and there the operational value stream is actually selling that product, we're going to measure our success on things like retention, revenue, acquisition. So in short, by looking at the work we're doing and how it supports the operational activities, that gives us in the development value stream a clear understanding of the outcomes we're striving to achieve. And of course, if we're not achieving those, we need to inspect and adapt and align to the correct solutions we need to develop. Now, the second source of development value stream KPIs that we need to incorporate come directly from the strategic themes. Each SAFE portfolio has a set of strategic themes, which we typically define in the OKR, objective and key result format. You can see an example on the slide here. We have an objective to increase customer engagement in our community platform. And typically there's 3 to 5 key results that we use to help us understand how we might measure whether we've achieved that objective. And then naturally, of course, because they're written in this particular format, they're very conducive to being incorporated into that set of KPIs that we use to measure the success of the development value stream in achieving their outcomes. Now, one thing I mentioned previously about this measurement model is that it's also applicable at all levels of the framework. So therefore, when we think about outcome metrics at the team level, as I mentioned, these will simply be the iteration goals. What outcomes does the team commit to achieving by the end of this 2-week iteration? And then across the Agile release train, what are the PI objectives that we define, shifting our focus from output to outcomes that are aligning all the teams on the Agile release train, helping to focus on the needs of the business and how we're going to achieve those. And what's nice about defining outcome metrics at each level of the enterprise is you can start to see how it helps us to align strategy to execution. The iteration goals move us incrementally towards the PI objectives, and they in turn describe a plan that's going to help us execute against the strategy that we've just heard being presented as part of the PI planning event. So that was a brief look at the outcome measurement domain. Now I want to go through the competency measurement domain. And this is where we're looking to understand how proficient are we as an enterprise in the lean agile practices required to actually achieve business agility. Now, within SAFE, we define these lean agile practices needed for business agility through what we call the 7 core competencies. And you can see them on the slide here. And these core competencies are defined specifically to support the steps that I showed you previously in that business agility value stream. And while we know from experience, each core competency does deliver value independently, they're also interdependent. So we know that true business agility really only emerges once all the core competencies are in place. And the question the SAFE enterprise is asking, of course, is how do we measure our progress against these core competencies? And the answer is that we're going to use SAFE assessments to do that. And it's going to start with the SAFE business agility assessment, which you can see on the slide here. What the SAFE business agility assessment is trying to do is answer the question, how agile is the business at this particular point in time? Typically, we'll measure across an entire SAFE portfolio in one go. We'll have members of the LPM, key business stakeholders, members of the LACE, representatives from the Agile release trains within that portfolio, coming together to assess across all 7 core competencies. Now, importantly, we've made some updates to this business agility assessment in 3 areas. The first thing that we've done, and we released this just a few weeks ago, is we've reduced the number of statements down to 43. So we've shortened the assessment, made it much more focused. We've also greatly simplified the construction of the assessment statements, again, to improve usability. But perhaps the biggest change we made is we made the decision to remove all the SAFe-specific terminology from this assessment. So now it's completely agnostic, which means that you can actually assess your progress very early on in your journey, even perhaps before you've started on your SAFe implementation. Perhaps you can take a baseline measurement to help you understand what are the first steps going to be in your implementation plan. Now, the main use case for the business agility assessment is to understand which broad area we need to focus in, which of the core competencies do we need to invest in. So you can see that lean portfolio management is scoring particularly low on the 5-point scale. The next step, once we recognize that, is to then access one of the specific core competency assessments. There's 7 of those, 1 for each of the core competencies, and then assess again with the added fidelity that that specific assessment gives you. So although these are structured very similarly to the business agility assessment, they're scored on the same 5-point scale, they go much, much deeper, and they'll help and guide us in much more detail to actually focus on the recommendations we need. So whereas the business agility assessment has 5 or 6 statements around LPM, this one has 29 focus statements around lean portfolio management. And this is really going to help us to identify the growth recommendations we need to take forward as part of our improvement or implementation roadmap. Now, one of the questions we often get is, when should we use these assessments in our journey? And we've designed them to be very flexible. I put up a slide here with the SAFe implementation roadmap with just some examples of when you might choose to use them, but this isn't meant to be exhaustive. We're seeing a lot of organizations get great benefit out of using the business agility assessment early on in the journey, creating a baseline against which they can demonstrate real progress. But we're also seeing teams and arts using the team and technical agility assessment and the Agile product delivery assessment as part of their regular improvement activities. So teams using the assessment to feed into their retrospectives, the entire art accessing the assessment as part of their inspect and adapt at the end of each PI. And then, of course, once you get to the accelerate step in the roadmap, one of the patterns that we're seeing many enterprises use is running the assessments on a cadence. So every 3 to 6 months, running the business agility assessment, or maybe moving around the different core competency assessments, understanding how we're performing in one particular area. Just a final few things to say on this, because these are some of the questions that come up again and again, is how should we facilitate these assessments? Now, we recognize 2 different facilitation approaches. The one on the left, Act Then Discuss, describes the typical situation where you're sending out the assessment via a survey. The benefits, of course, is that you can get a very large sample size. One of the challenges is we need to make sure that those assessing really understand what's being asked of them. So the facilitation approach on the right, what I've called Agree Then Act, tends to be our recommended approach. Running the assessment in a workshop format, perhaps 20 people in attendance, going through each assessment statement in turn, discussing, understanding, setting the context, and then allowing the individuals to assess to make sure we get all the individual data points. And what I think you'll find is the discussions you have in this workshop actually help to elevate some of the important topics we need to be talking about. And then finally, of course, what is it that we measure? What do we analyze in terms of the data that we've gathered from these assessments? And we typically recommend analyzing these 3 things across both strengths and opportunities. So number 1, which of the statements that we measured are scoring highest? We want to amplify those and share the learnings. Which ones scored lowest? That's where we want to focus our improvement activities. If we're using the online assessment tools in the SAFe community platform, we can compare to the worldwide index or industry benchmarks. Where are we ahead of our competitors? Where do we need to catch up? And then perhaps most interesting, looking at the standard deviation. Where do we have the least standard deviation, the highest amount of agreement? Or alternatively, where do we have the least amount of agreement or the highest standard deviation? And that often points to lack of transparency of improvement activities, siloed improvement activities, or perhaps simply misunderstandings with what's being assessed. Either way, it's going to warrant further investigation. That's going to finish it up for the competency measurement domain. I'm going to say a few words of introductions about flow metrics, then I'll hand it over to Lee to go through this last measurement domain. Now, anyone who's taken a SAFE course recently knows that we've been greatly influenced by the work of Mick Kirsten, specifically as described in his book here, From Project to Product. And one of the things, of course, Mick talks about in the book is the need for organizations to master large-scale software development. Because as he says here in this quote, what they're facing is an existential crisis. If they can't master it, they're at risk of becoming a digital relic. And to support organizations measuring their effectiveness in achieving this, Mick developed the flow framework. This provides us 5 flow metrics that help us to understand how value flows through the organization. SAFE is a flow-based system, and for this reason, we've incorporated directly the flow framework into SAFE, with one addition, flow predictability, which Lee will come to very shortly and talk a little bit about. So Lee, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk us through the flow metrics.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'll share my screen here in a moment and we'll start the flow introduction to flow metrics. Okay, so as we get into the introduction, I just want to emphasize what do we measure in the value stream. And the flow framework prescribes a categorization of all of the native artifacts that flow through the network of value streams and the tools and artifacts that our practitioners use from ideation through to completion, that those artifacts can be categorized into one of 4 areas: features, defects, risks, and debt, where features are new business value pulled by our customers, defects are quality improvements pulled by our customers, risk are those security, availability, compliance type work that are typically pulled in by our internal risk officers, and debt are those technical debt and process improvements and trainings and so on that are typically pulled by your process engineers and enterprise architects. We want to capture not only the new business value and creation of quality improvements for business value, but also those risks and debt type work that are contributing to business value protection for the products in our value stream. So I want to make that clear, and also note the color coding here. Features are green, defects are red, shown in red, risk in yellow, and debt in purple. We'll see that as I go through my examples here. And I'll also be taking us into a live demonstration here in a moment of seeing this in play for an actual development value stream with a team of teams. So let's go through the metrics one by one. First, I'll talk about flow distribution. So flow distribution is a relative percentage of the delivery of features or defects or risk or debt over a period of time that we will be analyzing, so that we can understand, is the work we're actually delivering aligned with the business priorities that have been asked of us those of us in the development value stream. Now, flow velocity is a measure of the throughput of the delivery system from a given period of time, let's say a particular program increment time range, or maybe several program increments, or maybe within a program increment. How much customer value are we delivering over that time? And here in this picture, we're showing a graph with a combination of features, defect, risk, and debt delivery shown in flow velocity. Flow time is a measure of the duration from when we accept work into the value stream until that's delivered into our customers' hands. And this is a really important metric for understanding our time to market. Are we improving with our delivery and time to market, or are we slipping? Just understanding that end-to-end delivery and understanding that the point at which we start the clock can be defined by your teams in terms of, like, maybe it's at a funded feature time frame, or maybe it's a little later, or however you decide where that's pulled into the value stream until it's delivered. That's what we're measuring for our duration or flow time. And flow load is a really important leading indicator among the flow metrics in terms of the work in progress. So what we're doing there is measuring all the work that has been pulled in, not your backlog, but the work that's actually begun, and understanding that work while it's in the active or wait states, in terms of, are we balancing our demand on the value stream with the capacity of that value stream to deliver. So there are very important insights that can be drawn from that I'll show you as we get into a live demonstration of how teams use the flow metrics here shortly. And then flow efficiency is a measure of while that work was in progress, what percent of the time was the work in an active state versus in a wait state, where in the wait state, you may have some non-value added processing happening. So it's a really good metric for diving in and understanding where we may have waste in our process from end to end. And that's important to understand, is that increasing or decreasing? What are the trends that we're seeing as we analyze the flow metrics over time? And then flow predictability, as Andy said, is new or added into the Scaled Agile framework along with the flow metrics from the flow framework. And Andy, if you'll take a moment to help us understand the beginnings of this as you brought that in.
For sure. So SAFe is a flow-based system, but we also know that SAFe introduces a cadence. We have an iteration and a PI cadence as well to help us manage some of the natural variability in product development. So what we want to be able to understand is, can we make and meet our commitments every PI predictably enough to help us then make commitments to our customers and business stakeholders. So what we measure is what is the actual business value delivered of the PI objectives that we described against the planned business value that we committed to at the end of PI planning. And we look at that as a percentage, and we're looking for somewhere in the 80 to 100% range. That's going to give us the ability to really manage and build out things like roadmaps. Again, the ability to make commitments with our customers and business stakeholders that we feel comfortable and confident we can actually deliver against.
Thanks, Andy. And I know everyone, I moved through those pretty quickly, but I'm going to try to reinforce those as I take us through a demonstration now of Tasktop Viz, which is an implementation of the flow framework for realizing the flow metrics for a given set of teams that are working together in a development value stream. So let's go ahead and take a look at that tool right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by just explaining what we're seeing here in this dashboard. This is actually data from real development teams, some 40 to 50 people working together in a development value stream. I've relabeled the product student success indicators to cleanse the data a little bit. And what you can think of the backstory for this development value stream is this one of several development products that support an operational value stream where this organization is providing, let's say, analytics and tools to help higher education administrators understand if their students are succeeding in their first couple years of university. So just to take you through what the different cards are in the dashboard, we'll go through those one by one here. So first I'm going to start with, sorry, I want to get my mouse positioned properly. I want to start with the this card in the upper left right here, which is the business results area. And this is really critical because it ties in what Andy was talking about with the different levels of KPIs and OKRs that we want to make sure that us as practitioners working in the value stream and understanding the flow of work and the effectiveness of that, how does that align with the purpose of this value stream and the organizational goals? So for instance, the flow framework categorizes the business results should fall into 4 categories: value, cost, quality, and happiness. And in this particular development value stream, they're tracking some revenue metrics. They're tracking some OKRs here and how they align with the business goals, and making sure that everyone on the value stream has line of sight to these goals, to understand the purpose of the value stream, and also to help when we're making decisions, having that criteria to bounce off and understand the pros and cons of whether we select certain features to pull in or not, or certain types of work that we're going to want to take on, which I'll show you here as I continue on through my example. The flow velocity metric here is, as I was mentioning, a measure of the total throughput over a given period of time. For this value stream, for my example, I'm looking at a set of dates from beginning of February through the end of July, so a 6-month period, because I'm going to tell a story of how this team used that information as they developed, as they realized and used it over time. Actually, a set of teams, I should have said. So their full velocity over the course of this 6-month period, they delivered 618 flow items. And I'll tell us here in a moment where this data is coming from, the different tools that's drawn from. But you can think of that their total aggregate of work over that period of time is shown here. We also can show the metrics in terms of just the feature flow itself. So they delivered 89 features during this period of time, 6 months, and their defect resolution and their risk work and their debt work. So you can imagine and see how that all comes together here. Now I'm also going to talk now about flow distribution. With this metric, we see over that 6-month period what their distribution of work was. And in fact, this is where my story starts with this particular example. They got their baseline of flow metrics at the end of March and recognized the data was telling them that they're just very overwhelmingly rich in terms of like the amount of defect work they're doing, and a very small amount. Remember, red are defect and green are features. Very small amount of feature delivery in this period, yet their OKRs and their business goals are aligned to that. They do a good job with annual recurring revenue and trying to get a certain number of new sales, new customer sales and so on. And so together, the team did some brainstorming, decided that they needed to take care of some back-end technical debt issues. And in fact, they started an activity, an experiment here around and they time-stamped it here, refactoring their back-end services. And that's what you see, this little marker. So starting here in April, they began to do this, take on this technical debt work, and they started to see a payoff in terms of how the rest of the metrics show them whether or not this is a good sign or a bad sign. And I'll come back to that here in a moment. Just want to finish walking through the 4 metrics or the remaining metrics. So flow efficiency is a measure of, as I was saying earlier, during this 6-month period, how much of the time on average was the work in an active state versus a wait state? And they were at 63% overall across all these work item types. Flow time, this is on average how long it takes for them to attain the delivery of value. And there's quite a difference here between features and defect risk and debt resolution, which we'll talk about here as I drill into this a little deeper in a moment. And then flow load, this is the amount of work and process they actually have in play at this point in time, average over this 6-month period. And this is an indicator of the work that they've started but have yet to finish. So before I go into a little bit more about the story and the things they did to try to overcome this issue with a lot of defect work and hardly any feature delivery, I just want to pop in to show you a little bit more about where these data sources, what these data sources are, and how this data is collected into the flow metrics. So what you're seeing here on my screen right now is a list of the different sources that have been categorized into features, defects, risks, and debt, and also a set of supporting artifacts that I can also measure alongside with these primary flow items. The features are coming from 2 sources in digital agility and 2 sources in Azure DevOps. The defects are coming in or being pulled in from ServiceNow incidents, the risk and debt information from artifacts from Azure DevOps. And like I said, I have a number of different artifacts coming in from other sources. I'll just explain this a little further by clicking into this product modeling tab, where you can see these are the tools in the tool chain that this particular development value stream is using to get their work done, the practitioners. They have planning happening in Enterprise One. They've got Rally and Azure DevOps as Agile tracking tools for different teams that are using those different tools. There's some release management being tracked in version 1 that applies to this group. And then also their post-production incidents, problems, and requests are captured in ServiceNow. And for these particular tools, we're also narrowing the scope to the specific containers or projects within those tools that these practitioners are working within. And what Viz does to bring this up and abstract things into features, defects, risk, and debt is it provides a means for us as members of the value stream, coaches, and also leaders to look at the native artifacts that we have visibility to attain and map those into one of these items, feature, defect, risk, or debt, to provide this aggregation up to have a higher level view and normalization across all the different types of work that's flowing, to bring that in so that we can then measure the flow of those through the value stream. So we can map, for instance, a problem, incident, and so on from the native tools here, ServiceNow, into feature, defect, risk, or debt. And then we can further qualify that with with various conditions here to explain, not only are we interested in that container, but maybe some different pieces from different planning levels, or depending on the artifact, like different kinds of conditional statements. And then for each one of these artifacts that we read in, we're also going to normalize sorry, let me find a good example here. We're going to normalize the data from its native artifact to, let's say, its native state, in this case, this epic with analysis, approval, breakdown, and so on, into new, waiting, active, and done. And so I've spent a good amount of time on this, but what I'm trying to show is that there are so many different types of pieces of work with different practitioners and different functional areas that we want to be able to find easy way to transform and pull those up into something that we can use to measure flow. And that's what Mick has put forward in the flow framework, is this idea of bringing those into the flow metrics in the terms of categories of features or defects or risk or debt, so that we can understand the total aggregate flow across all of those activities. So with that, I want to continue the story here with this particular group. So what they did is they decided to invest in technical debt, time-stamped it on their flow metrics here so that we could see where this experiment began. And then we start to see some indication, initially a little bit of dip in terms of their velocity and throughput of new feature delivery. But as they stuck with this a little bit and refined their experiment, they started to see a nice uptick. And actually, they're at the point right now where they're delivering the features. Their feature velocity is quite high, especially compared to where it was when they first got their baseline of data. And this is the kind of example of a continuous improvement activity where we have the data here telling us, in this case, hey, we're just doing way too much defect work, and we're not taking any time to take care of some of these back-end architecture issues. And if we do that, will that pay off in terms of our ability to deliver features? And so they're seeing a nice payoff today in terms of this. Their flow time, the time it has taken them to deliver these, has started to drop down and level off, which is a really nice sign. And also if we take a look at their defect resolution here, when I go and click here and to look at my flow metrics for defect resolution in red, I start to see also they've got a nice downward trend in their throughput of defects, and also the amount of defects, the distribution of defects is starting to even out to a much lower level. So this particular experiment paid off for them, but also just an example here of using the data to have data-informed decisions about what we want to do next, understanding our most constraining issues, trying to address those, bring that to leadership so that together we can decide what's our next best improvement strategy, and use flow to be able to provide that key set of information to make those improvement strategies come to life. Now, this team, they're not out of the woods yet. We're still, we're looking at their data through 6 months. They're still doing some things here that they need to continue to address. So for instance, as they were taking on and improving their ability to deliver more features, it seems that it doesn't seem, the data shows that they've taken on more feature work into the value stream. So their flow load, their WIP is getting higher. And that's not a particularly good thing unless they're able to handle that WIP with their current capacity. And it turns out we get a lot of insights from the combination of understanding flow velocity and flow time and flow load based on queuing theory, and in particular Little's law, and understanding having data over a good period of time to understand the stability of the system. Viz can do some insightful measures, and that's what this indication is here about how much WIP do we have how much work do we have in progress, and is that work in progress adequate or above what we should be having given our run rates? So what this I'm showing here very quickly is what this indication is. This is an analysis that Viz has done looking at the flow load and flow time and flow velocity for this value stream, and says, there is some 78, almost 80% of the work that's in progress here for for the development value stream for feature delivery is not moving at the same rate as the 21% or so of features that are flowing. And if we were to stop all accepting new features, we have some 8.4 months worth of work to finish off that we've committed to. And that would take us like 4 times as long as what we're seeing flow out in terms of flow time, because that stuff will have been stalled for so long. So this is a really powerful thing to understand, this insight that we're providing from digging in and taking a look behind the flow metrics to understand what's happening, where do we have waste, and in this case, we have way too much work in process for this group. And so they're going to have to do some work to address that. And there are actually tutorials and coaching that are built into this product to help people understand that. And just real quickly, I want to point a couple of other insights that we gained from looking at the flow metrics as a set. Just a second, I've got to click off this. So for instance, let's say I want to narrow in, I'm going to narrow my scope here just to look at my epic delivery to make the demonstration move a little bit quicker. If I want to drive in and understand what's holding up my work, there's a fine bottleneck, an analytic here where I can join in and look at where is work waiting and how much work is waiting in the work that's in progress in the value stream. And it does that by providing a scatter plot here that shows us where things are taking longer to get through the different states that they move through in the progression of those features, and then how many of these features are held up in a given state. So what we're seeing here, if I can hover over this dot, is that there are a number of features here, which are, I've categorized epics as features that are sitting in an approval state, waiting to be approved, some duration of time, some maybe 5 times longer than another project team's epics are waiting to be approved. And so this is the kind of visibility that we can gain when we're looking at flow across all the different kinds of artifacts and so on, to see where are our most constraining issues, where are we waiting, in this case, longest for approval, and what should we do about that? I mean, it's the visibility to say, why are 2 of our project teams moving along pretty nicely in terms of getting through the approval gates relative to 2 others? And is there something here that we need to dig into and use our Lean 5 Whys to understand what are the root causes behind that? And because we have visibility into where this data is coming from, you can also further navigate in to see what's happening behind the scenes. What are all these work items that are piling up, and what can we do maybe to analyze that a little further? So analyzing the flow metrics from looking at trends and understanding changes and how they impact, how things are impacted from those experiments, as well as digging in and looking at insights, can be really powerful for our ability to understand, back to what Andy talked about at the originally, our business agility and understanding that flow end to end, and are we doing well with our efficiency and effectiveness of delivery. So with that, I just want to point out a couple of additional things. Now, we've been looking at one development value stream, and I've been moving pretty quickly to show this. This is a set of teams, like I said, of some 40 to 45 people that are working together on this particular development value stream. I also can look across a set or a portfolio of development value streams to get a sense for how are each one of those products within those that those value streams are developing, how are those doing with respect to each other? So I can look at those at a glance, and then also some really powerful insights that can be drawn across those in terms of understanding for the set of value streams that we're measuring, how are they doing in their shift from project to product in terms of, are we generating flow metrics for that set? Are we tracking business swaps? Are we doing experimentation to look for improvement strategies for each of those? And then some prescriptive insights here about, do we have good or bad feature and defect and risk and debt delivery given what we should have for these types of value streams? And then one really powerful insight here as well, looking at the run rates of each of these value streams. which of these in our portfolio has capacity to take on new work and in terms of their work in process is balanced versus those where maybe we have way too much work in process and we've got some work to do there to understand what's causing that problem and how we can address those issues. So this at-a-glance capability to understand not only the value streams themselves individually, like I was looking at here with the student success indicators and looking at trends and understanding insights and bottlenecks and wastes within those, but also looking across the value stream across the set of value streams to understand where we may have opportunities for shifting resources and understanding our new demand that we have and how and what kind of capacity we have to take on that are all able to be provided because of this idea of measuring at above the fray of the day-to-day activity to see how work is flowing across all of these activities, again, end-to-end from ideation all the way through to completion. So with that, I think I'll turn back to the presentation now as we'll continue on here, and we'll certainly be open to taking questions as we move ahead. So Andy, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And before we get into the Q&A, as you mentioned, I just want to say a few things about effective measurement. So if you move us to the next slide, please. One of the things that was important to us when we put the new guidance together was also to share some of the success patterns that we've seen for organizations that have implemented metrics. Number one, we talk here about using measurement in conjunction with other discovery tools. Lee talked a lot about how the metrics we just looked at, the flow metrics, gave us real insights. What we're encouraging you to do here is once you have those insights, go to where the work is done, what we call Gemba, speak to the people, take some qualitative measurements, really understand the message behind the numbers so you can take the effective and right improvement action. The second thing we talk about is applying metrics where they support improved decision-making. And this is really a response to organizations that have struggled to know what to measure. And in trying to solve that problem, they've measured everything. And that becomes a real burden in terms of managing all those different metrics. So what we say is ask yourself two questions. Number one, will this metric we're thinking about including help us make better decisions than the information we already have available today? And secondly, if we think it will, do we think we need to start measuring this now? Are these decisions we need to start thinking about today? And that'll help you focus on a core set of metrics that are going to help you make the right decisions at the right time. Number three is fairly common to all of us. Just be cognizant of the impact that metrics can have on behaviors, specifically if you start to tie achievement of those metrics towards individual or team compensation. So be careful of things like a blame game starting to emerge, where maybe one team blames another team, could have been something completely out of their control, for failing to help the art achieve a metric that they had in mind because it was linked to some additional level of compensation. And then lastly, and I guess most importantly, is interpret the metrics carefully. So Lee talked about things like flow time and flow efficiency. If we see flow time reducing or flow efficiency increasing, on the surface that looks fantastic, but let's look at that alongside our outcome metrics. Are the features that we're delivering more quickly and more efficiently actually the most valuable things to be delivering? If they're not, the system might look like it's working more effectively, but the overall value delivered will be less. So try and use the different measurement domains in combination to really give yourself that full understanding and comprehensive picture. Next slide, please, Lee. And I just put this quote in here. I particularly like this one from HBR last year, really emphasizing, like many things on this journey, we need leaders and leadership to help put in place the right culture for things like metrics and measurement to really flourish. So we want to create a culture where there's transparency of information, where we're focused on things like using the metrics for problem solving rather than allocating blame, where we have an approach of the facts being friendly and using that data to our advantage. So like most things, we need the leadership to take the first steps here and really exhibit the right behaviors that we want the rest of the organization to adopt. And I think with that, we'll move to the next slide and I'll hand it back to Laurel, who will take us through the Q&A.
Perfect, thank you. We do have some questions that have come in. If you have questions, please ask them in the Q&A box. So the first question is, would this be adaptable to singular teams or other Agile at Scale frameworks like Nexus?
you want to jump in there, Lee? I'm not sure if it's a question
Sure.
about this or.
Yeah, so measuring flow, it's interesting. And also if you think about it, if you look at lean-based principles, we talk about listening to the voice of the customer, identify the value stream, create a pull system, and make work flow by eliminating bottlenecks and waste, and then seek perfection. Those are kind of the fundamental underpinnings of lean. And if you think about no matter what methodology or approach people have used, at least over my career, we started with, like waterfall and IEEE standards and stuff like that. And things have evolved to become incremental and iterative and agile, and scaled agile being a really powerful mechanism to kind of pull a lot of these learnings over years together. Any of those approaches, there's always been a value stream underneath it, and there's always been a good reason to measure flow. People understand things like efficiency, throughput, lead time, and so on. And so I think there's quite a number of opportunities to understand and analyze flow, no matter what may be there. But I think it's really important to understand with so much that we have moving in the idea of large enterprises, moving forward with improvements for becoming, better and better at providing digital experience for our customers, that we need to take into account some of the difficulties that are being addressed by, the combination of what we're talking about here today. Andy?
Yeah, I summarized perfectly. I completely agree with everything you said. And, when you look at the measurement model that we're proposing today, or the one that we've put out the guidance on, it talks about 3 broad measurement domains: outcomes, flow, competency. They would certainly apply in any flow-based lean agile system. Of course, the competency measured by the SAFe assessments are measuring specific SAFe practices, but competency can be measured through the use of different assessments in different circumstances. And of course, those are measurement domains. So within them, the specific metrics that you use may also vary slightly as well. But I think you described it perfectly, Lee.
Thanks.
Excellent. The next question we have is on flow efficiency. Does this include items that are waiting in an active state?
Well, part of the exercise you'll go through, at least with Tasktop Viz, is defining the mapping between, let's say, a native state in a, let's say, like a defect tracking tool with the flow states of new, waiting, active, or done. So you can decide that, a state that you may consider waiting in that native tool is actually an active state that you want to measure. And you can also do what if scenarios to switch the model back and forth and see how that plays out. And further, you can do some conditional modeling where you would say, this is actually going to be a waiting state if this other, let's say, field like a label is set to a certain value, and then otherwise it's an active state. So there's quite a lot of flexibility there to be able to map that and then be able to see how that correlates to what you consider to be waiting or active.
Great. The next question is on flow predictability. Do you have a recommendation for how to get a sense of flow to end users when there are limitations on when users can accept new work? Our objectives end up being deploy to prod/dark, with customer use coming later based on release governance limitations. So we see art flow, but it's based on achieving objectives as stated, not necessarily achieving end user value.
Well, I think there's two parts to this question. The first is around flow predictability. And actually, the situation that's described is very desirable. This organization is moving their features all the way through to production. They're keeping them there, hidden behind feature toggles, waiting for them to be turned on. We know that releasing is always a business decision. So it's very common that organizations have set releases, set times when they want to introduce new functionality. Maybe they're building out marketing plans or other activities need to be completed. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Of course, in the PIs where you have a release, you'd expect there to be an objective that describes those release activities, and then you could focus in on whether we're achieving those specific objectives successfully. And then, of course, one of the really nice things about the stuff that Lee showed us in the flow framework is it gives us different levels of insight. So when we measure things like flow load, we can see how much work is in each state. We can see how many features are done, ready to be made accessible to the users. Just sitting there, that's going to help us think about whether this release cadence is appropriate, given some of the cost of delay that we might be incurring, but also things like flow time. We can measure flow time from when we start the development to when the customers use the functionality, or we can measure it all the way through to when that functionality is on production, but not yet generally accessible. So I think, I don't know if you want to add anything there, Lee, but the things you showed gave all the different insights. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's perfect, because we have actually customers doing it both ways, even within a given value stream, because they're curious, you know, like, well, what is the lead time one way or the other, the flow time from acceptance by the customer, customer picking that up from a feature flag, or versus the flow time to the delivery to where it can be picked up. And sometimes understanding the delta there can be really valuable.
Excellent. We have some that kind of relate and are saying, how do you create trends or snapshots to be able to show the instance time to resolve over a specific period of time, or the number of defects open during a period of time?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a stab at that. So one of the things that we're seeing is we're looking at flow here as the features close over time in this particular example, or as the defects are resolved over time. What was the number of those defects that closed during a given time period? So here, for instance, in the month of June, we had 68 defects close. And we can look also at like how long, when those close, how long were they in progress? You can also sort right down by a lower degree, like by week, to see that trend over a week. And in some cases, if I shorten the date range here to, let's say, the last 3 months or so, I may also have an opportunity to look at things from a day-by-day measure. So depending on, you know, the detail and the analysis you want to do, you have a lot of opportunity here to analyze that. And I hope that answered the question. Did I miss anything on that, Andy, or do you see anything else there?
I think that was it, and that sounded.
Yeah, and just while you have this openly, I think the next question, and you might be able to show, is why do you measure in months and not PIs? Is there a way to see progress of each iteration?
Sorry about that. That was my example here. So yeah, you can set the time range to any date range you want by days in the calendar. So to align those with your program increments certainly can be done as well. Yes.
Great. The next question we have is, what is the unit of measurement for each of the metrics? For instance, effort versus business value, or are they using a mix of both?
Yeah, so like for business value, we're using a mix. Like in this case, we've got a mix of KPIs and OKRs that are there, like Andy was saying, to give us line of sight, so that we're not just delivering features, we're delivering features that align with what the business needs or what our customers need, that sort of thing. So you're going to see opportunities here to enter different kinds of metrics across the categories of value, cost, quality, and happiness, which are recommended by the flow framework as far as what we want to map the flow, the delivery of business value units like features. How do we want to map that to what we're looking for in terms of business goals? And was there a second part of that question, Laurel?
I think you answered it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And the next question we have is, how about strategic planning and calculations for reprioritization between the different projects and epics impact measurement?
Yeah, I saw this, and it's a very interesting question because, of course, one of the things fundamental to what myself and Lee have been talking about here is covered in Mick's book, From Project to Product. We're trying to allow ourselves the ability to make these reprioritization decisions where they're needed without having these big impacts that the traditional project mindset would have led us to, because of things like fixed requirements, fixed scope, project budgets, project resources, all those kind of things. So we want to create a system that allows us to make effective changes to scope when needed. But of course, all these metrics can apply at each level. So we can look at things like flow efficiency at the portfolio level. We can look at which items start flowing through the portfolio Kanban and then perhaps stop or get blocked or even move backwards in the other direction, because it's something we start on, stop, and then we decide there's something more important. Lee, did you want to add anything else there?
Yeah, just one thing, Andy. I think that flow distribution is really powerful metric in this regard. And one of the things Mick included in his book was a reference to zone management by Jeffrey Moore, where he talks about different zones in a business and how some zones are carrying mature products, where other zones are incubating products or transitioning products from incubation stage to a mature product. And one of the things to think about there is strategically, we would have different priorities for each of the cultures that are developing those and maintaining those applications. And so you may say for a very mature product, we're looking to have a very stable environment, and we may be spending a little more time on technical debt and compliance type issues than something that might be in an incubation stage, where we're really going to focus on getting features out the door. So the emphasis and the strategies and the prioritization we may set also depends on the zone or maybe the life cycle of that value stream product and so on. So there's quite a bit of insight there too. And thinking about they're not all the same. There's going to be some strategic differences among the types of development value streams that you're overseeing.
Great. And one last question before we wrap up, and that is, how do we begin to educate business leadership to avoid them continuing to mandate timeframes for completion?
Well, I know it may seem like a cheesy answer this, but I would say, when we've had the privilege of having Mick talk at the SAFE Summit in previous years, when we've had the opportunity to read through from project to product, the important thing that it does is speak to that leadership and executive audience through the application of examples, helping people to understand the importance of moving to this product mentality. I would highly recommend to see whether you can engage your leadership with some of the work that Mick has done. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. There's also a number of podcasts that Mick has done over the last almost 2 years now with many executives in those very same positions who are talking about lessons learned and how they managed to not only like champion this from the top down, but also excite people who are in the value streams on up. So there's some really nice work there across a lot of different industries that you may like to listen to when you have an opportunity.